Good morning, John.
How do I get my camera on?
You're on. I see you drinking a Slurpee. Good morning, Ashley. Are we ready to go?
Good morning. Yes, we are.
Okay. So I only have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm sure we'll have more members trickle in a little bit here.
Hopefully.
Yes. So let's just get going. Ashley, if possible. All right. Good morning, everyone. It is 10:55, so I'm going to call the Public Works and Mobility Committee to order. We continue to meet via Zoom webinar. Ashley, if we could share how to join. I think all of us know by now how to join by Zoom webinar, but please know that you can call City Council and leave a voice message by calling Ashley. Thank you. By calling 406-552-6012 and by emailing council at council@ci.mt.us. If you're joining us today via Zoom webinar and would like to provide public comment, please let us know by raising your hand and we will allow you to speak and provide comment. So with that, if we could get a roll call for attendance, Ashley, please.
Okay, sorry about that.
No worries.
One moment. Sorry, my computer crashed on me.
Oh, no worries. Do you want me to take roll call?
If you wouldn't mind, thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Stacy Anderson. Not in yet. Becerra is present. Carlino.
Present.
Contos.
Here.
Hess. Not in yet. Jones. Not in yet. Jordan.
Present.
Nugent.
Present.
Savage.
Present.
Cheryl.
Present.
Basika. And West. Not present yet. So we have it's 4 absent, I think. Okay, with that, we will move to approval of minutes. We have minutes from June 15th to approve. Are there any changes to those minutes? Okay, seeing none, those will stand approved and will be on our consent agenda. Is there any public in attendance who would like to provide public comment on items not on the agenda? Don't see any, so with that, we'll move along to our first item on the agenda, and that is Patty Creek Restoration Letter of Agreement. And Tracy Campbell is here to present. No,
Actually,
Nancy is.
Tracy, yeah. So Tracy is actually on vacation this week. So, but this will be relatively quick, I think. At the last meeting, I presented the entirety of like the Patty Creek Restoration Project and everything that's going along with that. And that particular portion of the project is funded by a specific entity, Montana Watershed Coordination Council, for approximately a little over $5,000. So this, what I'm presenting on today, is a letter of agreement from the Department of Environmental Quality, and they are offering us approximately another $5,000 for future Patty Creek projects, essentially. So it's just going to be an extension of what I am doing this year through November. So it's just collaborating and engaging more homeowners along Patty Creek Drive into Bancroft Street to promote the restoration project. Just more education regarding that, handing out more educational pamphlets to those homeowners and surrounding areas, hopefully along the entirety of just Patty Creek, even going into the canyon. And then we are also wanting to try and facilitate a Friends of Patty Creek group. So that's kind of what this extra funding will entail. So it's a little bit different and it's a little bit more of an extension from what I presented last time.
That sounds great. Let's see, Amber.
It does sound great. I would be happy to make the recommended motion.
Great. We have a motion on the floor, no public to provide public comment on it. Any questions or from council members? Okay, seeing none, we'll take a roll call vote, Ashley, and then for the record, Heidi West and Gwen Jones have joined.
Becerra,
Yes.
Carlino,
Yes.
Contos,
Yes.
Jones,
Yes.
Jordan. Yes, sorry. Nugent,
Yes.
Cheryl,
Yes.
Basika,
Yes.
West.
Yes.
That is 9 yeses and 0 nos.
Hey, Ashley, this is Jennifer Savage. I'm here also,
Okay, thank you.
and I vote yes.
Okay, thank you. I will get you added. That is 10 yeses and 0 nos.
Thank you, Ashley, and thank you, Mackenzie, for all your work on this. And yeah, keep us updated, if you will. I think this is really interesting.
Will do. Thanks so much.
Okay. Our next item on the agenda is a construction services agreement with Western Excavating, Knife River, and Paulson Electric for emergency repair services. And Logan McInnes will be presenting.
Yes, thank you. I'm Logan McInnes, Deputy Director of Public Works for Utilities. So yes, these 3 contractors have worked for a long time with the water utility in an emergency repair basis. So Western Excavating and Knife River have for years have kind of been the go-to folks that if you get a call on Saturday night at the middle of the night and you have water bubbling out of the ground, they are available. They have a contract. They're required to have personnel and equipment available to respond 24/7. And similarly, Paulson Electric has done, basically all the electric work for the utility for a lot of years, and particularly on an emergency basis. So if you lose a pump or you lose communications and you need issues with, electric issues, they're kind of the go-to firm. So we would like to continue that practice to have access to those critical resources for emergency situations. Yeah, I did, Mirta, after our discussion yesterday, I did check with Lee, so it says a cost not to exceed $24,999. That's just kind of the limit that the mayor is authorized to sign a contract for. On a cumulative basis throughout the year, we likely would exceed that. We do a lot of lake repairs after hours, but on an individual basis, we would be within that amount certainly for any of these type of repairs. So Lee Griffin felt that was fine within our procurement policy. So I did want to follow up on that item.
Great. Thank you, Logan. I appreciate it.
Yep.
Okay. Any questions from council members or anyone who wants to make the recommended motion? Amber.
I don't have any questions, but I would be happy to make the recommended motion.
Great. We have a motion on the floor. Still no public to provide public comment on this motion. So with that, we will take a roll call vote, please. Ashley.
Becerra,
Yes.
Carlino,
Yes.
Contos. Jones,
Yes.
Jordan,
Yes.
Nugent,
Yes.
Cheryl,
Yes.
Vasika,
Yes.
West.
Yes.
Hey, Ashley, Jennifer Savage again. I vote yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, that's 9 yeses and 0 nos.
Great. Thank you, Ashley. Thank you, Logan.
Thank you.
Okay. We have one more item on our agenda, and that is a continuation of the South Sussex bypass right-of-way and public utility easement vacation. We started this during our last committee meeting. There was a presentation and we have a motion on the floor, but we are going to continue that discussion and address any future questions from council members. So with that, I will pass it on now to is Jeremy, are you presenting or is Brant? Okay,
I will lead off.
great.
Thank you.
Take it away.
Thanks. Jeremy Keene, Director for Public Works and Mobility. And as Mirta said, this is a continuation of the conversation that we had last week in committee. We just wanted to take the opportunity to answer a few additional questions that were raised by council in that meeting. Just a quick refresh. This is the South Sussex bypass right-of-way vacation request. This is that block between South Avenue and Sussex that reroutes traffic from South Avenue over to Sussex to access Brooks. So this was part of the original Brooks South Russell project that was completed in 2005. And the proposed vacation would reroute that traffic with new intersection improvements on South and Stevens and Sussex and Stevens to maintain the flow of traffic. And this is the two proposed vacations. One of them is the right-of-way for that diagonal bypass, and the second is an easement that still exists over the former alley that was on that block. This is the proposed design for a new roundabout at South and Stevens and other site improvements around that block. And there are some utility relocations and abandonments that would need to happen as part of this as well. So staff proposed 8 conditions of approval. The first 7 are largely related to the necessary site right-of-way improvements that would be needed. Changes to the urban route designation with the Department of Transportation. And then the final condition is relative to some affordable housing commitments that the developer is making. So there's really three parts to this. There's an approval for use of Urban Renewal District 3 funding with the Missoula Redevelopment Agency, and their board has taken action on that and approved funding for the project. There's a request to change the urban route designation, which has to be approved by the Montana Transportation Commission. And then the final action is a right-of-way vacation with City Council. So there's no particular order for these. There are three different decisions by three different agencies, but they're all interdependent and contingent on one another. So this project goes back to 2019. Even before the current owner bought the property. This property was originally owned by the school district, and when it went on the market, the development team approached us, and we had some conversations about the feasibility of relocating that route, the street through the diagonal portion of the property. And really what they were looking at is what the feasibility of getting a higher yield project on that block would be. And so we spent time with the development team, with staff to identify what the feasibility would be, and had some discussions with the Department of Transportation and identified the required approval process that we would need to go through. And then in 2021, we worked with a series of staff meetings, both design review team and our public infrastructure review team, to identify the required improvements that would be needed. And then there were a series of meetings with MRA, Community Planning, Design and Innovation staff, two council members, to identify what the public benefits would be and what kind of requirements we would want to include in conditions around a vacation. And so the conditions that you see today really reflect the outcomes of those meetings. And Emily Harris-Shears is here, and she'll talk a little bit more about some of the details that were involved in those conversations in just a minute. So finally, where we are today now in 2022 is doing the formal TIF, or Urban Renewal District funding applications, the right-of-way vacation, and the action to change the urban route designation. So I'll just quickly cover the public benefits that we found with transportation. We talked about these last week quite a bit. If you have additional questions, I'm happy to provide more detail, but we really think that this helps reestablish a more traditional grid. It's better landform for buildings and interaction with the street, allows for the buildings to better address the street and anchor the corners. It creates a nice enhanced access for trails and the fairgrounds at the corner of South and Sussex, South and Stevens. This becomes kind of a gateway for the fairgrounds and for that area. It also is it's a new dividing point for where South Avenue traffic has to split to go over and access Brook Street. And having worked on the original Brook South Russell project, I actually think that a roundabout would have been the preferred option in that project back in 2005, had that been a tool that was available. And back in 2005, and actually, when the project was being designed before that, roundabouts were pretty new in Montana and in the United States, and it was not something that we were able to consider. And I think if we were doing the project today, this would be the design. And the reasons for that are really improved safety and traffic flow with roundabouts. They just plain work better, and they also help with keeping traffic speeds low. It allows for easier crossing distances, shorter crossing distances. This project will help complete missing pieces of sidewalk around that block. And one of the things we found with the design of the Brook South Russell project is we were seeing some crash trends at the South and Stevens intersection because of the sight lines that are created by that diagonal. So if you remember, we actually had to add a four-way stop there, and that was largely because of the crash trend that we were seeing. So we think a roundabout will function better for safety. Also really helps with bus access to the school district. Left turns from Stevens to South Avenue are one of the big movements that the buses have to make, and this will really improve safety for those turns. And then finally, the opportunity to connect a new cycle track or shared use path along Stevens, connecting the fairgrounds trail with other trail and bicycle infrastructure to the north of the project. So with that, I'm going to pass off to Emily to talk about the housing benefits.
Hi, I'm Emily Harris Shears, a housing policy specialist with CPDI. It's nice to see you again. So I'm expanding on the information that we provided or that was provided in the questions that I heard last week around the decision to set aside 20% of the units for households with incomes up to 80% of area median income and for a period of affordability for 35 years. So as Jeremy just mentioned, in 2021, agency leadership, council members, and the developer identified different scenarios that could possibly demonstrate the public benefit and maintain feasibility for the project. Ultimately, the set aside for 20% of units was identified as the most viable for the project and also providing an acceptable return on public benefit. Oh, Jeremy, I just realized I can't click. Thank you. The 20% of the rental units equals 22 units dedicated for households with incomes at or below an equivalent annual income of $52,250 a year for a household of 2. Units will be use restricted for a period of affordability of 35 years. And to conceptualize the impact beyond the first household, we estimated that on average units will turn over every 3 years. And just so we could do some math about impact using that variable, it's estimated that around 11 households would benefit from 1 dedicated unit. And using the same variable of turnover of average of 3 years, 242 households could be served over the 35-year period of affordability for the 22 units. And Nate from Blue Line shared that they anticipate the lost revenue cost for these 22 withheld units for the 35 years is $7 million. And the 35-year period of affordability, I know there's been conversation about how we get there. That is really both an industry standard and also an acknowledgement of a building's useful life, and just an acceptance that in this field we will likely do an additional investment to do preservation to both rehabilitate and keep the units in good habitable condition, as well as extend that period of affordability if the owner is open to it. So in May, we shared the progress we're making with the design of the voluntary incentives program. I know this chart is kind of hard to see. It's a copy and paste from the report, but I thought it would be helpful to just identify and share that, what we received from Design Workshop was really as a group of recommendations that have different percentages of both the return we'll receive of dedicated units and the length of a period of affordability based on the investment that the city is providing in exchange. And so I wanted to just highlight that the right-of-way vacation, which is a recommended incentive, is intended to be dependent based on the amount of right-of-way that's being vacated and the ability to use that right-of-way for additional housing density, which in this case, they utilized in 2021 when they negotiated that by the developer looking at the pro forma and seeing where their breakpoint would be, as well as negotiating how much space we're providing with their right of way. So even though we haven't fully implemented these recommendations, our teams are using these as sort of our standard approach. And some of our incentives, in this case, it's not the case, but just back to that chart, you don't have to go back to it, Jeremy, but I just want to highlight that some of the incentives that we will offer will will net a relatively low return, but will contribute overall to our goals of building a diverse portfolio of restricted use units. And that's really important because it helps us scatter our impact across the city rather than centralizing it. So in addition to the tangible public benefit of the 22 set-aside units for 35 years, the Casa Loma project supports other meaningful impacts toward our housing goals. It supports 3 of our 4 primary strategy areas in a place to call home. We have the opportunity to deepen our collaborative relationships with the project developers that are focused on supporting housing solutions in our community. In addition to this project, Blue Line is a primary development partner on the Villaggio and Trinity projects, which will cumulatively bring 402 dedicated income restricted units for people with incomes below 80%, and with the I always get the Villaggio up to 60%. So really targeting that to people with extremely low income or with low incomes within the next year. And this project also allows us to make changes and pilot the approaches that we will implement in the voluntary incentives program in the next year, as we hope. And finally, as I was saying, this project helps us contribute to the pipeline approach of having lots of different types of housing in our portfolio of use restricted units and scatters them across the city rather than centralizing them in specific areas, which is also a value outlined in A Place to Call Home. That's all I have.
Okay, thanks, Emily. I'm going to pass it off to Annie at this point. We'll talk a little bit about the URD funding.
Good afternoon. Annie Gorski, Deputy Director with the Missoula Redevelopment Agency. So the Casa Loma project applied for funding from URD 3 to fund deconstruction of a small building on site, relocate some utilities, including a new water line, which will increase capacity to the site and to the larger neighborhood, as well as improvements to the streets surrounding the site, including the improvements that Jeremy mentioned, the new roundabout at Stevens and South, new sidewalks, and a new cycle track. The project they're proposing is a nearly $30 million project, and their request for urban renewal funding was just over $2.2 million. The larger project involves construction of 132 housing units and 18,880 square feet of commercial space. So in May, the MRA board provided conditional approval of Casa Loma's grant requests based on the following public benefits. The MRA board's approval was conditioned upon approval of the right-of-way vacation, as well as the other relevant agency approvals, including tied to the changes to the urban route system. So in terms of public benefits, and some of these are outlined in the Urban Renewal Grant Program criteria or application, I should say. Ratio of public funding to private investment. So our grant program currently recommends a ratio of 1 to 10. So what that means is for every public dollar or MRA or urban renewal dollar invested in the project, that would leverage a minimum of $10 of private investment. So for this project, that leverage is actually greater. The amount of private investment is more significant. So that ratio is closer to 1 to 13. Annual property tax generation. This property is vacant, and some of it has not been on the property tax rolls. The new generation that's estimated as when the project is completed is just under $300,000 annually. In terms of job creation, the developer estimates between 250 and 600 construction jobs, as well as permanent jobs tied to the commercial space. Jeremy, can you help me go to the next slide? And the other piece that isn't shown here that I want to mention is design excellence. So for all of the urban renewal grant programs, we require, even if they're not required by code, that the project meet design excellence goals. So that is intended here, and the developer has agreed to that. Additional public benefits, including vacation of the right-of-way. So they've shown us that by vacating this right-of-way, there's additional space to create an additional 80 units of housing. Jeremy spoke about the public improvements or the infrastructure improvements on site. The key thing here that the board was excited about was the connectivity between the residential uses on one side of the site and the commercial uses, Sentinel High School, the park, the fairgrounds. Alignment with the city's strategic plan, notably the reference in the strategic plan regarding sustainable growth. So we think this is important, redeveloping a block in Midtown rather than at the fringes. This is a site that's very close to transit and will, we think, benefit that planned Brooks Rapid Transit project that MRA is working on now and has secured funding to do feasibility of. Thank you.
Thanks, Annie. So there are two recommended actions today. The first is the request to remove Sussex Avenue between South and Brooks from the Missoula Urban Highway System, and there's a resolution for that. And the second is to adopt the resolution of intent to vacate the South and Sussex bypass, along with the public utility easement, and that'll be to set a hearing on July 18th. So here is the actual motion, and we're happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thanks, Jeremy, Emily, and Annie for that added information. Are there any questions from council members? Gwen, go ahead.
Thanks. I think this is probably for Nate Richmond, maybe Emily, but I feel like last week we were discussing, affordable housing and the ratio and how much we should be requiring. And it's interesting, in the last couple of days, I've actually had some conversations with developers discussing the unique circumstances economically we're finding ourselves in right now. And it's not only that we need affordable housing, but it's getting that housing built and the challenges with not only labor, but material and distribution and prices changing all over the places, et cetera. So I was just wondering, I know that Blue Line is an affordable housing developer. That's your mission, and you do this all of the time. Nate, can you just speak a little bit to how you're grappling with these issues right now in such a fluctuating economy to meet the goals that you're setting with affordable housing? Because we've worked out a formula for this right-of-way vacation. It seems reasonable. I just want to put some context around that.
Sure, I'm happy to talk to that. When looking at this development, obviously it starts with sort of a massing study to see what type of density we can get on the site and still park it. And then we take a look at the rental revenue generated by the rental units. And in this particular property, we wanted to add some for sale product because that's something that's seriously lacking in Missoula. And the whole while trying to keep all of the units either affordable or attainable. And what I consider attainable would be 120% AMI and below. Affordable, generally, we're looking at 80% AMI and below. So really what it comes down to the underwriting of the property and taking a look at what our anticipated construction and development costs are and what the debt that would be generated by those and how we would support that. We usually rely on the rental revenue to support the debt and the for sale product to buy down some of that debt to make it supportable by the rental revenue. So we started looking at the affordability requirement and looking at other properties that have had right-of-way vacations and know that the precedent there was 20% of the units at 120% AMI. We wanted to do a little bit deeper income targeting because I think there's a serious lack of affordable rental housing at the 80% AMI, especially in that 60 to 80% that is not served by the tax credit program. I think that's really where the big gap is. So we wanted to hit that 80% below. And in backing into that number, 20% or 22 units was what we could support and still make our debt service. If we, were to increase that number of units, obviously that's going to reduce the rental revenue that could support debt. And that's going to increase the sales price of the for sale units. So that's kind of in a nutshell how we came up with this in terms of, maintaining some flexibility. We obviously didn't want to restrict the entire project, even though our intent is to make this affordable and attainable. We have to maintain some flexibility for the very fluctuating construction market out there right now. Materials and labor being the big unknown in developments like this. And so we have to maintain some flexibility. So another bump in labor costs or a bump in lumber costs doesn't completely crater the entire project.
Thanks, that helps, because it is a big downside if there's too much risk, and it can not happen. And Emily, did you have anything to add? I saw you nodding your head. Okay, well, thanks. I just wanted to get some more information onto the record regarding the tight margins and how you approach this, and that this is, it's kind of a different conversation based on my experience being on council when we're talking with a developer who is not an affordable housing developer versus when we are talking with one. So thanks for letting me ramble, Mirta. Thank you.
Those are good points and good background to have for us, Nate. So I appreciate it. Next, we have Mike Nugent and then Daniel Carlino with questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Councilwoman Jones. I was going to ask a question similar to that. Nate, if you could turn your camera back on, I actually have a question for you too. Not getting off that easy. On the roundabout portion of the kind of, I guess, the negotiation or the requirements for the project, are your investments as the developer in the roundabout completely offset by MRA money, or is there a gap in your investment that is there for that kind of public infrastructure improvement?
I believe that our investment in the roundabout is offset completely by MRA money. That said, we have not bid out that work yet, so there could, we have a commitment from MRA for a certain amount of funds. If the costs are increased, then our we'll be responsible for those additional costs.
Okay, appreciate that. And one follow-up, Madam Chair.
Go ahead.
And Nate, this might be a tough one to answer, but I kind of just want to talk about it from the kind of reality of the bigger picture. But if we were to not approve the street vacation, there's basically two parcels, and one of them, if I remember the presentation from last week, could have a 50-unit building and the other one was similar. Is that correct?
I think we've looked at a couple of different scenarios. I think to really appropriately park and make a livable space, we'd probably realistically be looking at about 24 townhomes would be the most efficient use of that space for both sites combined. I think we could do up to 50 if we went with a multi-family, but then we'd be really scrambling to look at maybe some underground parking or something similar to that.
So without underground parking, you're looking at a total of 24 townhomes total.
I think that was the most beneficial model if we didn't have the street vacation.
So the street vacation, I mean, obviously greatly impacts the number of units we can get into this block in Midtown.
Correct. And that economy of scale also will translate to more affordability in the development. Obviously, if we're doing 24 units on those two parcels, those are likely going to be a higher price tag than if we can do 132.
So one more question, Madam Chair.
Go ahead.
And just kind of a follow-up, and this one might be kind of hard to answer, but I think that sometimes people don't completely understand how development calculations work. At some point in this whole project, as we talk about percentage permanently affordable and your goals for the rest of the units, there's a threshold where it would make more sense financially to just do those 24 units than it would to carry on with this project. realistically, how close to that edge are we in this market with kind of the changing interest rates and the changing costs of labor and construction costs?
I think it's a different answer from me because we do have a mission to provide affordable housing, and we try to incorporate that in all of our developments. I guess I look at it from sort of the bigger picture and what the city's trying to do with its housing incentives and affordable housing incentive program. It's the predictability that is the most important thing to me, and knowing that when we go through these working groups and we, have worked on this for well over a year now, that when we get to the point of the decision making, that the process we've gone to this point is honored, and we're not at the 11th hour throwing something completely unpredictable. To me, that's sort of the bigger breaking point is, we're going to hold up our end of the deal we've been working with the city for the better part of 2 years now, is their end of the deal going to be held up? Because that predictability and that length of time that drags out because of additional meetings and additional requirements ultimately translates to additional costs that are passed down to the tenants or the homeowners. As far as going back to that 24 unit, that's not the most desirable use of this property. I think it's certainly not the highest and best use of the property. That would be our last resort. And what would push that would just be the project no longer, as it currently stands, being financially feasible. And, there's a number of different factors that could create that.
And if you had gone with just the 24 units, there'd be no council hearing, there'd be no anything, it'd just be building permits, correct?
Correct. It's appropriately zoned. I think actually the zoning would allow us to go up 120 feet on that site in terms of height requirements. And those two triangles that look a lot like the Space Needle, I think, if we went up that high, but there is some significant density allowed there.
And so there'd be none of the infrastructure improvements like the roundabout either.
I think we'd likely have to do the alley vacation, and then we would have to probably reroute some utilities.
Thanks, Nate. I really appreciate it.
Yep.
Thank you. Next, Daniel, and then Amber.
Yeah, a couple questions. I was, with materials costing so much nowadays, I feel like there's a natural incentive to deconstruct, and I was just curious if any of the TIF funds are used for deconstructing. And then I just had one more.
Yes, we are, we've met with Montana Deconstruction on the site. There's actually some really good salvageable material on the property. We were quite surprised when we got into the ceiling and the crawl space to see that there's some really nice true dimensional lumber. I think Jason from Montana Deconstruction said the quality of some of the materials is on par with what they took out of the Merck building. Certainly not quite the scale, but quality wise. So we are going to be deconstructing the site and salvaging whatever materials we can from the property. And
okay, so that's where part of the TIF funds are going, I believe, as towards deconstruction. Okay.
Yeah.
And then my only other question was, it feels like by the time this gets to council meeting, it's a pretty already baked cake. And I'm just curious, like, how the couple council members get chosen to be able to be in on the negotiations in the first place with developers, because I heard that there was just 2 council people that were able to be in on the negotiations, and then it feels like by the time it comes to the public and to the all council members, it's already kind of a already baked cake here. And I'm just curious how all council members have the opportunity to get in on these negotiations in the future.
Daniel, I can speak to some of that, and I can say that I was one of the council members who sat on those discussions, primarily because I'm chair of the Public Works Committee, and the right-of-way vacation is part of what this committee oversees. The other council member was Jordan Hess as chair of the Land Use and Planning Committee. As to the cake being baked, I disagree. This is why it's before us today, to make any potential revisions or recommendations, ask questions. Certainly you have to start somewhere, and I think that the preliminary conversations to even look at the feasibility of this proposal is all that took place. We used the 20% as a benchmark because that is what had been used in the past with other developments. We also looked at from a infrastructure perspective, what the potential cost of that segment of road would be valued at, and we try to put some sort of dollar amount to that right away vacation and translate that into housing. So those were all the conversations that took place. There was no baking of any cake at that point. It was simply trying to foresee from all departments whether this was something that could be put before city council, and if it would pencil out for both the developer, but also addressing the public good that comes out of partnerships like this one. So I can tell you that from my perspective that that was the rationale behind just those two council members. It was just primarily based on the fact that it was transportation and land use that needed to collaborate, if you will. I will move to Amber and then Gwen.
Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate Jeremy's comment that we didn't look at a roundabout so long ago because they just weren't a thing in the US. I don't know, this is in Ward 4, and I can't even tell you how many times I have driven through there with nothing being built and thought about what can we do on this land. So appreciate Nate as a partner in this, and I appreciate what I am sure has been with Councilwoman Becerra and Councilman Hess, a lot of hours that you have spent along with staff and with Nate and trying to figure this out. So that's great. I'm glad to see this street being vacated because I think that the plan there doesn't work as well as we thought it might work. So my question though, so those are just some comments, but my question, and I can't see who all's here. I'm wondering about kind of the traffic plan around it. And if someone could speak to that, we have of course, the high school there, which I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but when I'm sure Mike can attest to this, but when, I was knocking doors, there's a lot of concern with traffic in some of those areas, mainly the streets kind of leaving Sentinel parking lot. But I'm just wondering kind of how you anticipate this traffic flow working. If you could just speak a little more to that. And I know you covered it to some degree last week. So I'm sorry to be redundant here, but I think it's good for the public to hear one more time.
Yeah, that's a good question. And Stephen McDaniel from WGM Group is on the call and can dive in on detailed traffic questions. I'll just say at a high level, I think the roundabout will work very well, that it'll have a good level of service, including in the peak hours. And then we also looked at the intersection of Stevens and Sussex and whether that intersection would also need some sort of a traffic control device like a roundabout. And the conclusion there was that it will actually work just fine with a stop control. And so we're not proposing a roundabout at that location because the way that the traffic flows, it actually functions fine with a stop sign. So, Stephen, do you want to speak to any additional detail on that?
Yeah, I mean, short of pulling up a traffic report and throwing a bunch of numbers at everybody, I would just say that a benefit of this location is that it is centrally located and we are on the gridded network. And so we have really good access from a traffic standpoint, from a vehicular traffic standpoint. As soon as you leave the site, you can go in any direction. And that means that you won't have, cars queuing up at one intersection just to access the site. You'll be able to disperse and go however you want. If you're coming up on, you imagine just leaving the driveway and you look left because that's your standard way and you see 3 cars backed up, you can turn right and you're on the gridded network, right? So we actually are expecting very minimal traffic impacts. I think less than a second of delay per vehicle at the various study intersections or the various intersections that we studied. And then from a multimodal standpoint, Jeremy hit on it really well, the roundabout and the existing traffic calming along south. So there's that kind of what we call a chicane along south. We're going to extend that into the roundabout which will eliminate people from kind of making what the school district called it an illegal U-turn into the parking along the south side of South Avenue. So that'll increase safety, but then also the roundabout in and of itself is a traffic calming device. I mean, it's an intersection control device, but it does calm traffic just because of the nature of the geometrics of it. So you have to slow down as a vehicle entering that roundabout, and then that provides increased safety for pedestrian and bicycles around it. So we do expect an increase in safety and minimal impacts on intersection operations.
Thanks.
Great, thanks for that. Gwen, go ahead.
Oh, thanks. I just wanted to add on to what you were saying, Mirta, in response to Daniel's question. And I just wanted to say that council creates policy, and we've created a huge amount of policy that applies to this project already. We've got transportation plans in place, Missoula redevelopment policy in place, and then affordable housing. We've got our housing policy in place that took years to create and was passed. So when staff is in meetings initially to work with developers on projects, all of those policies come to bear, and that's what they're working through, and having some collaboration from committee chairs is to just help provide input and keep a finger on the pulse. But there's already a lot of lenses to look through and policies to apply. So I just didn't want it floating out there that every single time we invent the wheel, we don't. So that's just some additional information I wanted to put on the record.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from council members? Okay. There's no public in attendance to provide comment on this item. We do have a motion on the floor from last week that Ms. Vasika put on the floor. So if there are no more questions, we will move to a roll call vote. Daniel, go ahead.
Oh, is it a chance for comments or?
Yes, yes.
Oh, thanks.
Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, I was hoping to actually make an amendment here. I moved to amend number 8 of the conditions of approval for the first sentence to read this. The developer shall set aside a minimum of 20% of the residential rental units, which shall not be less than 22 units for households earning up to 80% of area median income for a minimum period of 75 years.
Okay. I will, let's see. We have an amendment on the floor. I'm gonna look to Ms. Jones to help me navigate this potential amendment. I don't know. First, I think we need to ask staff and the developer about what that does to the issues that were brought up as to why we arrived at the numbers that are before us. And then we need to go through the process for dealing with the amendment. Is that right, Ms. Jones?
Sure, I think as chair, you can ask, based on the amendment, you can ask staff for comment. And I guess the first thing would be to ask the person who made the motion if they will take this as a friendly amendment or not, but.
Okay, so we will start with questions to staff. I'm gonna look at both, look for Emily's response to this. I know that you already provided the rationale behind the current condition, but I'll be interested to know from you and from Nate what this amendment would do to the, based on the pro forma that was used to make those calculations. If you can answer that for us.
Nate, I'll start if that's okay. And then pass it to you. So I'm just collecting my thoughts. Well, first, I think that I would lean back to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund policy, which is the guide we used for this, that we received guidance from the city attorney's office on, that a 75-year period of affordability for a project that's not a community land trust or something else that has that built-in stewardship is more challenging for us to administer. And Ryan Sudbury really advised us to scale our period of affordability to the industry standard, which is currently, especially for rental buildings, kind of going with the useful life of 35 years. And so that's where we did place that. I also feel comfortable with that in that we did a considerable amount of public comment and engagement last summer when the policies were drafted. We worked collaboratively with the Affordable Housing Resident Oversight Committee and talked pretty at length about the different periods of affordability. And so I feel that that's a both best practice and industry endorsed period of affordability, as well as an understood and endorsed policy in our community. The other piece I will say is that I will ask Nate to confirm this, but I could just imagine in thinking about the pro forma and the debt service that extending the period will likely impact that ability to pay down the debt. And, I think that's, and Daniel, I know you and I, Councilmember Carlino and I spoke yesterday about, at this point, the developer has provided us with insight into where the project still pencils. And I feel it's a good faith conversation. And there's concern when we start to mix up some of these variables at this stage, that the project may not be feasible and that we may not see a project. So that was some of my advisement yesterday when we spoke.
Thanks, Emily. Go ahead, Nate.
Yeah, just to, I guess, to add to that, the 35-year or 30 years we see a lot in the industry affordability period is generally tied to the amortization period of conventional financing. You're not going to get a loan that goes certainly beyond 40, but generally speaking, we're seeing 30 to 35 years. So at that point in time, there's going to be a significant refinance and complete financial restructuring of the property. And that restructuring at that point also includes a significant rehabilitation. You're going to see the probably new roof, new physical plant, new siding, and that refinance is all goes hand in hand with taking this property that's now been beyond its useful life and rehabilitating it and re-upping the financing. In the affordable housing industry, that's typically when you go back in and re-up the affordability period as well. So that generally speaking, if we get to the 30 years of a housing development and we're going to go in and do this significant rehab of the property, we're also going to seek out additional funding that will come, and with that additional funding will come additional affordability requirements, and you sort of start over with the affordability. So that's why you see that 30 to 35 years of affordability in the industry. It is the useful life of the building, and it's also the end run of your conventional financing that's in the property. As far as the feasibility, we're looking at probably a refi after 30 to 35 years anyway. So it's going to make that refi more difficult with a requirement that's essentially in perpetuity. Obviously in 75 years, I won't be around to shepherd that refi. But it also looks at, when we look at this, and again, I think of the bigger picture and trying to incentivize folks to get into affordable housing development. It's kind of the trade-off for what are we getting in exchange for what we're giving up. If I run out just say $200,000 a year in lost rental revenue from the difference between the 80% rents in the market run that out to 75 years, we're $15 million and that's a very conservative figure because obviously rents will continue to increase and that spread will probably continue to increase. And if we net present value that, it'd look even worse. But $15 million in lost rental revenue in exchange for about 18,000 square feet of property makes that some pretty expensive dirt. I mean, if you look at the going rate for real estate that has commercial potential in Missoula, and let's just say it's $20 a square foot, which I think is probably low, then we're looking at $360,000 for that right-of-way vacation. And we're paying that $360,000 back in 2 years, given the restrictions that we're proposing.
Great, thank you. Nate, I guess one quick, I just wanted to clarify, when after the 35-year ends and you have to reassess the affordability component, that wouldn't necessarily trigger council action, would it?
And only if we came back in for funding.
Okay.
Yeah, if we came back in for any additional funding, be it home funds, CDBG funds, and or additional MRA funds, it would.
Okay, great. That's good to know. Mike Nugent, then Gwen Jones.
Thank you, Mirta. I understand the desire to want to protect affordability longer. I have great concerns about us at the council level in an amendment phase going against industry norms that are so consistent that they're tied to all the federal tax policies on these things. And I think it's important for us to remember that we need to develop affordable housing wherever we can get it. And a big part of that is having private parties be willing to be those developers as well. And that this project isn't publicly owned, it's privately owned. So if we say everything's limited for 70 years and don't give any ability for them to reapply for tax credit loans at the 35-year point or do something different, the odds of these buildings being maintained in any fashion we would consider acceptable, I think is very limited. So I know we're not in the comment phase, but I worry about how we're trying to do this right now, although I certainly respect the conversation.
Thanks, Mike. Gwen, go ahead.
Thanks. I actually had a question for Daniel regarding your amendment. What is the rationale or the financial analysis that you're basing 75 years on?
Yeah. Well, if it was just a right-of-way vacation, I feel like I would be more fine with the 35 years, but with 2.2 million in TIF funds, and also got I think it calls for possibly a longer period of time. But my rationale was hearing from Habitat for Humanity, North Missoula Community Development Corp. These are experts in our town who are working on affordable housing, and they've been pushing us to try and secure housing in perpetuity. And looking at like the bridge apartments, for example, last year, we got lucky that we were able to purchase those and pay public funds a second time. Otherwise, we would have a lot of people who have different mental disabilities who would have ended up homeless. But if they had secured 75 years in the first place, then that we would have not come into that issue. So mostly from looking at Habitat for Humanity, North Missoula Community Development Corp's analysis of these things.
Follow up, Madam Chair. Okay, so you're not doing any financial analysis based on this project and the way the financing will work and the debt and the projected revenue. You're looking at other different projects than like Habitat for Humanity's business model, which is completely different and based on home ownership and home sweat equity, correct?
I'm looking at their advocacy, not necessarily their projects.
Okay, thanks. And I have a comment, Merita. Do you want me to make a comment now, or are we not to that stage yet?
Let me get through questions and then we can do comments, okay?
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Heidi, go ahead.
So I was wondering who the long-term steward of the affordability component is, or if there's one determined yet. Changing from 35 years to 75 years is that's somebody's responsibility. And I'm curious who will shepherd that.
Well, administratively, the CPDI office would administer that and ensure that there's compliance for that. And then I would assume that the owner of the building or the property manager or operator would do the actual tenant criteria and tenant selection and, policy income verifications.
Thank you. And we're holding comments, right?
Yeah, I just would like us to get through questions so that we can have all the information that we need.
Thank you.
So next I see Mike. Do you have a question?
I do. Daniel, you mentioned the Habitat and the North Missoula Community Development Corporation. Do either of them have policy statements you can share with us that state that they would like us to push for something like 70 years over 35? Because conversations I've had with them kind of talk about tax policy and things like that. So that's new information to me, if we're going to put out their names like that.
Yeah, well, whenever we were getting presented on the housing incentives, affordable housing incentives, Heather Harp, the ED of Habitat for Humanity, came to that meeting and told us right there that somewhere on this chart that we should be pushing for in perpetuity. And then I guess also just from my conversations with the people that run NMCDC, and I asked them specifically about this project as well, and they support the 75 years.
Madam Chair, I have one more question, and I'm not sure if anybody can answer this. Maybe Emily. Since the city and MRA was able to step in on the bridge apartments and that example was brought up, do we have any idea what the outstanding maintenance and or capital investment needed to rehab those apartments to an acceptable standard are?
I can't answer that. Sorry. I can follow up though.
Okay, because I guess what I'm getting at is one of the things that we've talked about is at the end of that 35 years, there's generally investment needed in bringing these buildings back up and maintaining their condition for suitable long-term rental. And if we move it to 70 years and it's income based, where's the capital reserve being built to do these improvements? So appreciate it.
Okay. I have a question for Nate. Nate, is Blue Line a nonprofit or a 501c3?
We are not. We are a for-profit company.
Okay. So the reason I ask that is because I think it's a different model, and you work under different parameters with different funding sources and mechanisms as Habitat for Humanity and NMCDC or any other land trust, correct?
That's correct. And I think the other big differentiating factor is North Missoula Community Development Corp and Habitat for Humanity are also working exclusively with home ownership opportunities, which are then maintained and updated by the owner. With rental properties, it is the owner of the entire rental property and that is maintaining and updating these. And those are, it's a little different animal than having a homeowner go out and fix a leaky pipe or replace a furnace, where, when we're doing it on a considerably larger scale. And that's, again, why that 35 years is there, because at that point in time, it's usually a big scale rehab of the entire physical plant of the building.
Yeah. Emily, do you have a comment or your hands up?
Yes, thank you. I hope that's okay.
Yes.
I wanted to just offer that our full affordability, our period of affordability policy does extend to 75 years for community land trust properties. And like everyone is elevating, there are significantly different administrative realities in a community land trust versus something like an apartment or even a homeownership model. And so that's where some of that nuance comes in. And we did actually respond to the community advocacy at the time of the policy development to extend the community land trust to 75 years. So I just wanted to add that context too.
Great. Thanks for that. Okay. Let's do comments on this, and then I would like to know if Ms. Pasica would take this as a friendly amendment to the motion. Gwen, go ahead.
Thanks. I'm not going to be in favor of the amendment. I'll certainly be in favor of the ultimate motion when we go back to that, but I'm not favoring this amendment. I think it's really a bad practice to try to steer a ship of this size in a completely new direction after so much work has gone into it, and it's all based on solid policy that council has created over the years. And when frankly, it's also not based on any type of financial analysis related to the reality of this project. And also, I'm very concerned that this gives an incredibly bad message to the development community that changes of this magnitude can be made at the last minute, and it's just a bad way to run a railroad. And I think it would ultimately disincentivize a lot of development in the future, which is exactly the opposite of the direction that we want to go in. So we need to be very careful about approaches like this. So I'm very much not in favor of the amendment.
Okay, Heidi.
I'm also not in favor of this amendment. I think this can't be compared to something like what the NMCDC or Habitat for Humanity is currently doing. In both of those models, they are moving towards a community land trust model. And whether or not what is on top of that land is homeownership or maybe a co-op or even potentially rental properties, the significant difference is that the land itself is being held by we'll call it a mission-driven entity. So either that's a nonprofit, either NMCDC or Trust Montana, and it's a significantly different tool from what we are seeing here. And it is also very, very different in whose responsibility things like maintenance fall under, even in the case of, let's say, a co-op owned building on top of a land trust, or even rentals, there is going to be somebody who is responsible for the maintenance of that structure. It might be the co-op owners themselves, and this is not anything comparable. And the 35-year-old or 35-year length of affordability makes sense in this system. So I hope we stay with this.
Okay, Mike and then Amber.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I appreciate the effort on the conversation, but I can't support this amendment for the reasons that my colleagues have mentioned. But I also just want to stress, we've talked a lot about housing in the last 6 months on council, and there are so many different entities and people working on projects to try and solve this. And some of those are nonprofit developers and some of those are for-profit developers. But in the system we're in, whether we like it or not, we need private investment and private development to help solve our housing issues. And when we are in projects such as this one, asking for private developers to come in and help us solve the problem, and they're willing to do that because we're giving something in exchange, we can't make it so tight that it doesn't pencil or make sense for them to do it, because a developer can't justify making repairs and maintenance to the income controlled or the affordability controlled portion of their project by raising the rents on other people, and or if we limit it too much, we take away their ability to make the project pencil at all, and then we have nothing. So I understand the desire, but in the system we're in, we have to recognize that if we want private money to help be part of the solution, it also has to make sense for the private investor over the long term. And trying to do something like this over 70 years would not make sense for any private investor. And I think, like my colleagues have said, that's very different than individual homeowners or community land trusts.
Thanks, Mike. Kristen, go ahead. No, wait, who was first? Amber.
I was about to talk over you, Kristen, so I was ready. So I want to echo, I guess, everyone's really comments so far. I do appreciate what Daniel's trying to get at here. And I also appreciate the fact that, you know, there are times that when we come in as council and there are amendments that make sense to us, and even if they are later amendments that we do. So I think that I appreciate you bringing that forward. I don't think in this case that this makes sense, mainly for the reasons that both Gwen, Mike, and Heidi just outlined. You know, Heidi has a lot of expertise in housing and understands the community land trust model in a way that I would never will, but that is a very, very different model than a private investment. And I want to, you know, also say again what Mike said, you know, we need private investment and the community land trust model, even though they don't always mesh perfectly, like in this situation. We need both of those to solve our housing problem. So, you know, I'm not going to be supporting it, but I do hear you, Daniel. And I know that there are some situations of a longer period of affordability built in makes sense. And those are great solutions, but they're not all the solutions. And so I like this model. I appreciate Nate as a partner in this. I appreciate the work that has been done up to now, but I'm not going to be supporting this because I don't think this amendment makes sense for this project for a private investment. So thanks for bringing it, but I'm not going to be supporting it for all the reasons that were outlined right ahead of me.
Okay, now Kristen.
Thank you. I have two questions. One is, and I may have missed this, after the 35 years, it can be reconsidered. Can it be reconsidered for another 35 years worth of affordable housing?
That will be, may I answer that?
Go ahead, yes, yes.
That will be dependent on the amount of investment. If it's trust fund investment, if it were something else like tax credits or something, then yes, it would have an additional 30 to 45 year period of affordability, depending on what they require. And then in the trust funds policy, it's essentially a sliding scale. So the more investment we provide, the longer period of affordability we ask for.
Okay, thank you. I have another question too, and this may not be the right time, but I want to put it out there. And if it's not the right time, then maybe we can find a way to follow up. But I do hear a bit that we want to make sure we don't, scare away developers. I've been reading, well-reviewed articles that are talking about how our housing prices in Missoula are not going to go down because we're a destination location, and that we're never going to be short on developers. And so I was wondering where we got the information to say that perhaps we might end up scaring off developers, because I think Missoula is a really development-rich environment. And that there's always going to be a developer who wants to come in and build something here. So I don't know, again, if this is the right time or not, but those are my questions. Thank you.
Appreciate that. Daniel.
Was Emily going to answer that question? Because she just put her hand up. Otherwise, I could go. Oh,
yep. Go ahead. Let me see. Emily, do you have an answer to that?
I would like to respond to that.
Sure.
That's a great question. I think the piece that we're missing here sometimes is that there aren't always a deep bench of developers that want to partner with the city and create housing that is affordable and dedicated for people who have limited incomes. That's really the work we're trying to do here with the voluntary incentives program. And one of the things that I hear from partners like Nate is that and I heard him say it this afternoon, is that they need consistency. And that's something that we're hoping to be able to provide in the voluntary incentives program so that we can bring more developers to the bench and have a, deeper pool of partners to work with. But from my experience in this role, it is not a deep bench at this time beyond our great nonprofit partners and our great already dedicated partners, but we need to bring new people in. And the way to do that is to offer enticing incentives that are consistent and that they can trust.
Thanks for that, Emily. Now, Daniel, go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, I appreciate everybody's comments and everything that everybody said about this. And I guess I just wanted to make it clear that I wasn't trying to compare this to community land trusts, but I was rather just saying that those nonprofits also advocate for affordability in perpetuity, not necessarily just for land trusts, but they were advocating whenever we were going over the incentive sheet, and also advocating for in perpetuity in other areas, along with other housing groups in town, like the tenants union would like to see housing set aside in perpetuity. And I guess I just want to, if this, even though this amendment doesn't sound like it's going to pass today, I'd like to at least get the conversation going as a council about when and how are we going to get any in perpetuity, because it's going to be a bummer, like whenever these come up and then we have to put more public funds into them. But I do understand the incentives. And lastly, I guess I just hope that we could still take this as a friendly amendment and vote on it before we vote on the original motion, if that's okay.
Yep, that's my plan. Mike, last question or comment on the amendment? No.
Thanks. Yeah, I was just going to quickly respond to Councilwoman Jordan's question on developers and housing, and Emily covered it very well. But the point I was making wasn't that people are going to stop developing here. It's that we need to be able to get them to develop the type of stuff we want to have them develop. And on private projects such as this one, that's not going to be publicly run, it's not going to be nonprofit run, it's going to be operated by a private developer. There's a point where it makes more sense for them to just go do market rate units. And in the bigger conversation, working in housing in Missoula, there's a reason that so many single family houses have been built that are well above the median price point. It's because those pencil a lot better than entry level homes. And I think that's when we say scare away developers, it's not scare them away from doing projects in Missoula, it's scare them away from doing projects that are affordable in Missoula. But I think that's a really great question, and I appreciate you asking it.
Yep, I appreciate that question too. And thanks for all the information around it. Miss Basika.
Thanks. Can you remind me what the difference between the friendly and the unfriendly amendments are?
At this point, I'm not entirely sure, but I think regardless, just for process and protocol and transparency, whether you take it as a friendly or not, we should vote on it.
Okay, because I'm not in support of this amendment, but even if I'm not in support, can I take it as a friendly? Because I'd be happy to vote on. No, I can't. Okay, I'm sorry, Daniel. I will be taking this as an unfriendly amendment. I said my comments about it last week, just because I think that with the more requirement of having more affordable housing makes the other units even more expensive. So that's why I'm not going to be in support of that. And I am willing to take this for a vote. Yes.
Okay. Thanks for that, Sandra. And Gwen, correct me if I'm missing anything in terms of
just
process.
Call for public comment and then vote on the amendment, and then we go back to the original motion.
Okay. There's no public right now to make any comments on the proposed amendment. So we will take a roll call vote on the amendment, please, Ashley.
Becerra,
No.
Carlino,
Yes.
Contos,
No.
Jones,
No.
Jordan,
No.
Nugent,
No.
Savage,
No.
Cheryl,
No.
Vasika,
No.
West.
No.
Okay, that is 1 yes and 9 no's.
Okay, so the amendment fails. Daniel, I appreciate you bringing this conversation forward. Certainly, we have more work to do in terms of continuing to improve what we can do for affordability and housing in our community. So we are back to the main motion. We asked for public comment last time at the last meeting, but we will do so again. There's no public to provide any comment on the main motion. Are there any final comments from council members? Please say no, because we are running out of time. Okay. No, you can provide comment. If you have any last comments, please do so. Okay, seeing none, we will take a roll call vote on this item, on the motion.
Becerra,
Yes.
Carlino,
Yes.
Contos,
Yes.
Jones,
Yes.
Jordan,
Yes.
Nugent,
Yes.
Savage,
Yes.
Cheryl,
Yes.
Vasika,
Yes.
West.
Yes.
That is 10 yeses and 0 no's.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to mention that yesterday, the Transportation Policy Coordinating Committee did vote on the infrastructure portion of this right away, and it was passed. So this is that portion of it is also moving along. With that, I want to thank everyone. Thank you to staff for all your work on this, and to the developer and all the council members for all your questions. And with that, this will be on our consent agenda with the meeting set for July 18th, I believe. Final action, Jeremy? Yes. Okay, with that, we will be adjourned. Thank you, everyone.